There are 72,519 stones in my walls. I've counted them many times.
But have you named them yet?
The Count of Monte Cristo.
You're listening to Writing Roots, brought to you by Aspen House Publishing.
Welcome to Writing Roots. I'm Lee Hull.
And I'm Lee Esses.
I'm amused that you chose the phrase about counting for the Count of Monte Cristo. Is that what that story is about? All about him counting the stones? It was the Count of Monte Cristo?
If that were true, the reader would certainly be feeling what we're talking about today.
And today we are talking about boredom. When a character is bored. Here's the thing. We don't recommend that you write scenes with nothing happening. But every once in a while, it is good to write a scene where the character is bored.
The question becomes, how do I write a character being bored without the reader being bored?
And the quick answer to that is, do it in small doses. Like I said, you don't want to write a scene with nothing, but you can very possibly start a scene where nothing happens. And then something happens to break the boredom of the character and keep the reader engaged.
We will always advise you to get to the good part as quickly as the plot will allow, because those are the moments that your reader will enjoy. Your character being bored is a difficult one to do well. Like in our opener, you can use humor to portray it, but we do have a couple of key tools to put in that toolbox in order to make sure that the reader stays engaged during your character's boredom.
So how exactly do you write boredom? Whether it's your main character or side characters, whatever, somebody's probably going to be bored at some point in time.
The first tool in your toolbox is going to be numbers. Can you, without rewinding, tell me what the number was in the opener?
392?
72,519.
It was very wrong.
But it didn't make a difference to the moments that we were portraying. And that's a lot of why it's in there. If your character is saying a number, especially a specific number, you aren't expecting the reader to remember it. You're just making a point. Readers don't tend to also be math people. I know there is a small subset and I'm envious of you, but for the most part, readers will see a number and gloss over it, which is why in past episodes, we've said, give us context for the numbers instead of the number itself. This is that 2% of the time where you're going to give us the number just to make us bored for a quick second.
And that is done in something like that beginning quote where a character is counting something. They're counting the seconds since they've been abducted. They are counting their footsteps as they walk along the top of the city wall on their watch. They're counting things because there's not much else to do.
Another tool for your toolbox will be redundancy. If you have a particular word or phrase that is key for every time the character is in a boring situation, Frodo passed by another gray rock. These types of looping mentalities that you have within the character's point of view can make something feel very redundant, very boring because we've been here before.
And when it comes to that, you can have the characters acknowledge that redundancy, whatever it is that's boring. Sam and Frodo in that example, does this look familiar to you? Or we've been here before, we're going in circles. They're acknowledging that they are on the wrong path and they are seeing the same thing over and over again.
Another way to portray boredom that is kind of a double-edged sword is to have really long paragraphs. You don't have a lot of dialogue, you don't have a lot of physical action happening, you just have a character looking out over the seascape. If your reader is spending time reading these things, they know nothing else is happening.
It's one thing that drives me nuts about some contemporary books. They will be in middle of a conversation, and then they'll have like 3 paragraphs of remembering something or going on an internal diatribe about something. And then after those 3 paragraphs, they'll finally respond. By then, I've forgotten that they were in a conversation. So be careful with this tool because it's assumed that however long it takes the reader to get through it is how long it's actually taking the character. Going back to something that I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, when you are using boredom, you should use it in transitions, not as the point of the scene. You start with 48, 49, 50, 51. There are 51 tiles in this ceiling. And then you can get to someone bashing the door down. So you represent boredom in a very quick segment, but then get to the action.
Starting at 48 and counting to 50, we aren't having to go through all of this time that the character experienced, but you are clearly indicating that the character has gone through this boredom, whilst doing your reader a favor and not putting them through that as well. I will say, if you're writing multiple point of views, you can have a scene where the character does nothing, but again, keep it short, couple paragraphs tops. You have this massive fight going on outside of the castle, and the king is trying to find the secret passageway, and the cook is going, well, cake's still in the oven.
I feel like a really good representation of this in film is, I think it was one of the Amazing Spider-Man movies, where Spider-Man is having this huge battle and they're going through a library. And then it cuts to Stanley's cameo where he's got headphones in. And it's just this nice peaceful, like, do-do-do, listening to his nice chill music as he's sorting books. And then it cuts to the fight, and then it cuts back to Stanley's cameo. And then it cuts to the fight, and then back to Stanley's cameo. It's a really good representation of this short little segments of boredom in middle of massive fighting, and it is mostly used as comedy.
Now, when you're writing, especially the beginning or the end of boredom, there are other emotions that are happening within your character. These will help you display boredom to your readers, especially if it's not your point of view character who is exhibiting the boredom.
Some of the accompanying emotions will include anxiousness, especially if they are locked up and they just want to get out. There's anticipation where they are waiting for something to happen, but it's not quite yet and they don't have control over the thing. There's frustration that can come along with boredom, or sleepiness where they are so bored there's nothing else to do but sleep.
I would say initially, when your character drops into a bored state, there is a return to something primal. I think that's why there's the sleepiness that gets pulled on. Your character starts their shift and then they begin to yawn immediately.
Is this why I do boredom eating? Because
Yeah.
I just shift to the primal need for food?
Yes.
Got it.
And it's the same thing of I'm in a prison cell and I immediately need to escape. There's that primal need for freedom. That can reflect your character's fight or flight to a certain extent.
Because if you are frustrated, if you are anxious, if you are too anticipatory, you're not going to be thinking about the logical ways to address what's causing your boredom.
Now, if it's not your point of view character who's doing it, having a repeated, especially a rapidly repeated physical gesture can be a great way to show that a character is bored. So if dad is waiting by the front door for the kids to finish getting ready to go, even though he warned them 17 times that they wanted to leave at 6:05, he's probably arms crossed, tapping his foot, waiting, come on, let's go. If somebody is waiting for the computer to load, then they're probably drumming on the desk that the computer is resting on, just doing something physical to release some of that boredom. And therefore, a non-point of view character can see this character is bored because they're drumming on the desk.
If you are writing a contemporary book where there are cell phones, the person could just simply be doom scrolling, not actually paying attention to anything they're doing, just scrolling mindlessly through whatever social media app they're using. You can also represent sleepiness fairly easy in another character where they are yawning, they're nodding off, they kind of lean back, cross their arms. Suddenly they have their chin resting on their chest, but they're not asleep.
Resting my eyes.
Who changed the channel? They magically know that you changed the channel, even though they are asleep.
And another useful way to exhibit a character that's bored, especially if they aren't allowed to be scrolling on their phone or doing anything else, is having them lost in thought, where they just completely dissociate from everything around them and they're doing their own thing. You have two sisters and a brother, and the sisters are vehemently arguing about the shade of pink that the carpet should be. And the brother is stuck with them and doesn't care. He'll stand there because he has to, but he's not listening to any of the conversation. So when one of the sisters goes, "Tell her I'm right." Huh?
This was me as a kid and why I often walked into polls. Because doing things like grocery shopping was boring to me as a child. So I would start daydreaming. And I would be off in a completely different world, barely tracking my parents to follow them. And definitely not paying attention to any pillars in middle of aisles.
That's called being a fantasy author.
When it comes to boredom, this is best done in small doses. It is easier to do for external characters, but make sure that you're not writing any scenes where nothing happens unless that is a very intentional point of your story. You need to go about that very deliberately. Otherwise, boredom can be a lot of fun to write. It allows you to create little humorous moments or juxtaposition for other things that are happening within your story. And the best way to do that is to
Write selfishly.
If you have a question or comment for our hosts or a topic you'd like us to cover, send us an email at writingroots@aspenhousepublishing.com or find us on Facebook by searching for Aspen House Publishing.